All right, hello everyone. So we're going to do this pretty sped up at the beginning and then slow down when we get into the Unreal Engine. So basically I am setting up my Rhino file to export here by creating separate layers for every object that I want to have different materials on. So as I set up all of these layers, I'm going to add a material to each one of those layers as well by selecting them and adding the material. Sometimes you have to tile and change materials to make them look right in Rhino, and sometimes when you export them into Unreal, you have to remake them. And the reason the layers are important is because when you export them, the layers will show up in the Unreal Engine, allowing you to modify materials for any object that has a specific layer, even if it is on the same object. Let's go ahead and jump back in live and see what we're going to do next. All right, so now I've got this set up. I'm going to go ahead and just export this as is into the Unreal Engine and see what happens. So let's bring back our wall. And I'm going to first change the units. This is key. So if I go to Properties or Settings, if you have a Mac, Units, change it from inches to centimeters. Centimeters is the default for the Unreal Engine, so it should scale this up by 2.54. Say yes. Okay. All right, let me go ahead and save this. And I'm just saving the file. Okay, now that this is saved, I'm going to go ahead and export. And I usually export selected. File, export selected. And I'm going to go to my desktop. And I'm going to create a new folder in here and call the folder OBJ. Okay, and if you need to put spaces or anything, always use an underscore. So go in there and change this to OBJ here. Make sure you have textures checked and go ahead and plug in data as well in case you have V-Ray. And save. Okay. So this is now made into a OBJ file. Alright, so the way you download the Unreal Engine, first of all, is you go to Epic Games website. And this is a big file we're going to be using. So, sorry, Unreal Engine tab here. There you go. And then you're going to create an account. It's all free, but the file is large. It's about 20-something gigabytes. So it is the major downside to the Unreal Engine, but it should be one of those situations where you just clear out some space and get an external hard drive and back up your files. You should do that anyway. So download it. It's going to take some time. It's a big program. Once it's completely downloaded, you're going to have this right here, which is called the Epic Games Launcher. Actually, I don't think that one takes that long. Once you open the Epic Games Launcher for the first time, it's when you download the Unreal Engine. Okay. So once you open this up, you should have under a library tab here, engine versions, and you go ahead and install the new version. The one I tend to use is 4.2, 4.3. 4.2, 4.3 is what I use. There are newer versions. If you use the newer version, there might be slight changes in functionality that you'll have to look up on your own, but for the most part, they're very similar. It's just I use this lower version so that it's more in line with other tutorials I've done, and also so students can share their actual projects with me and I can open them up. So I'll go ahead and launch. All right, so once it opens up, you get these different categories. You can, of course, open previous projects, but even though we're a lot of times doing architectural stuff, I feel like these are more for creating video walkthroughs than actual walkthroughs. So this is what I use. I use the game. And then I do use a template. You can start from scratch, but then you have to build all the player controllers and all the functionality from scratch. But the first person, you can actually go ahead and a lot of the functionality is already there. So we'll use that. We just have to delete some of the things because it is a first-person shooter game, and you don't need to be carrying a gun through your gallery. So let's go ahead and go next. So here we can select different resolutions. If you really want to make your objects beautiful, you can use ray tracing enabled, but that takes a fancy computer to make it really work right, especially when you're modeling. Maximum quality is okay for smaller things, but if you want to make it really shareable, you make it scalable 2D or 3D. I'm just going to go ahead and leave maximum quality there for desktops, and I'm going to click and actually add starter content. The starter content is a little annoying, and I find myself deleting most of it, but there are some nice materials in there that I like to use. So let's go ahead and click on starter content and go to where I want to store it. I'm going to change that to desktop, and I'm going to go to my folder. And create a new folder. Okay, whatever. Name it something, and change the name on my from my project to _T. All right. So before we go into anything, I just want to give you a little lay of the land here, what we're looking at. Down here on the bottom is where you're going to import assets, whether or not that's image files, materials, media files, geometry, 3D models from any program, Blender, whatever, Rhino in this case. Then you've got over here are the details. So like if I click on an object, I'll get a detail for that object, where it is in space, what materials are on it. I can even change the materials right there. You also get information about collisions. Do you want the collisions on, off, that kind of stuff. This is all details on each object you click on. You also have world settings here. So if you wanted to change the way the sunlight reacts or how things are rendered with lighting and whatnot, that would all be done through the world settings, as well as what player controller is used standard. Up here is basically what you've got in the arena over here, in the area. So if I were to delete something from over here, you'll see it disappear from the area. Over here you've got your basic things to add into the arena. You've got lighting, directional lighting, point light, spotlight, skylight. The skylight is already in by default. You can also get different types of skies. Cinematic, I don't deal much with this yet. Visual effects, post-processing volume is really cool. That actually allows you to control what elements are being processed so that you can create different types of contrast or fog, that kind of stuff. Sky atmosphere, atmospheric perspective, things getting farther away. Fog, all that kind of stuff. Geometry, let's put some stairs and boxes. This is the very rudimentary stuff that you can model with here in the Unreal Engine. That's why we import most things. Volumes, blocking volumes, camera blocking volumes, kill volumes, like if you fall into a cliff or stuff like that. But important ones are like blocking volumes. You can keep people in a certain area. And navigation mesh boundaries are important for VR. Basically it says what objects you can jump on through teleportation. So these are all trigger volumes, really cool. Like you can put that in front of something and it's a box, and when you collide with it, it can make another function happen. It's how you create media players and have them play when you stand up in front of them. So there's a lot of stuff under volumes and classes or cameras and all that kind of stuff we'll get into. But this is basically stuff that can be added to the scene this way. Up here at the top, you've of course got your save button. You've also got blueprints here, which is basically the controls for the entire game. So you would put things in here to create a interaction. If you want the mouse cursor to turn on when the game starts, when you go through blocking volumes, you want something to trigger, you put all of that information in here. So that's kind of the architecture of the gameplay. Cinematics, if you wanted to create a sequence going through your walkthrough using camera angles and dollies and all kinds of stuff, you can add a sequencer. That gets pretty complicated. Build is actually once you've been messing with things and you want it to kind of bake the materials and the lighting and look at everything as a whole. It's kind of like a render process. Play is if you want to interact with the game as it is, to see how it plays. So if I click on play, I am now in the game and I can control the WASD keys. And you can see it's nice that things are already set up, WASD, just like a normal game. I'm also capable of shooting projectiles and stuff. All of this is of course going to be deleted except for the ability to walk around. So hit escape, gets you out. And then you can see this is the camera with the perspective on the gun as the first person shooter, and that's where you're going to start every time you start. So you move this character to the beginning of your gameplay. Okay, so that is pretty much the lay of the land here, how to navigate the space now. Now we're in this arena, not as a first person, as just a mouse looking around, right? So you use the wheel to zoom in and out, and I do recommend using a mouse with this program like any CAD program. It's much better to use a mouse because you have more buttons and wheels and control. So zooming in and out, zooms in and out. If you click and drag towards something, it kind of gives you the perspective as if you're walking. So clicking and just dragging, you kind of walk through the space. So that's how you can get really close. And then right clicking pans up and down, and holding the right click. Okay. So then say you get way over here and you want to focus on an object. If you click on the object and just hit the F key, it brings you right to it. So those are some navigational things that I think really help. And then if you shift and I think it's, yeah, shift and click, or just click the mouse wheel. Actually, clicking the mouse wheel kind of pans you through the space. Sorry, you don't have to hit shift. Just clicking the mouse wheel works. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this geometry out of here just to get started actually making our game. So delete, delete, delete. Keep your light source, light mask volume, post-processing volume, skylight, keep that. Atmospheric fog, that's fine. Just deleting 3D geometry. You can also click on it and just hit delete, which is nice for the bigger things. And then delete where it says first person template. And now you've got a space that's set up with a post-process volume, a nav mesh volume. That's all for lighting and rendering in real time. You've got all of your first person character, all of that set up here. So next what I want to do actually is delete some stuff from the player controller so that I can get rid of the gun and stuff. So that's down here in content. Like I mentioned before, inside of content you've got these different folders. My first person is right here. First person weapons, all of this is right here. But I'm going to first delete it from the first person blueprint right here. Okay, so in here this is actually your controls that are put in here by default, which is nice. It's all set up for you already. And then if I go to the viewport here, I can see I can delete these objects. Now they're still in my my content browser. They're just gone from right there, which now means if I delete them from my content browser, it shouldn't get angry with me. So then I'll compile it, which means saving changes. And now it's going to tell me all of the errors. It says the blueprint is not a scene component, therefore target must have a connection. So all of these here basically saying what needs to be fixed because I just deleted that gun. So look over here in the construction script and you can see some problems. So if I go ahead and delete that, now compile, still showing some errors, less though. Now go to the event graph. Here's some errors, right? So if I delete those two, compile, right here, so I can actually delete spawn projectile, this whole section here. So I'm basically just deleting all references to the projectile and the gun and all that kind of stuff. Okay, compile one more time. And we got a check mark. So that means I have successfully deleted all references to the gun. Makes things clean. Okay, so now I'm going to close this, and I don't need the first person projectile. My first person character is referencing it still. Nah, it's fine, I'll just leave it. So now I don't need first person HUD, I believe, is just to draw an axis. I don't need that. And I'm going to force delete this because I'm going to create a new HUD reference in the world setting. So basically it's saying you got a problem over here because it was referenced over here. So now if I go to game mode, I can go to first person game mode. It's fine. Okay. Next, what I want to do is I'm going to bring in my geometry. This is actually the fun part. So let's go ahead and create a new folder. There's already one called geometry, but I'm going to create a new folder and call this one Rhino Geometry. And you might want to create a separate folder for your materials and stuff just to keep it organized, but I'm going to just go ahead and do this. Import, and then I'm going to go over here to you can see my materials are right there that aren't just basic colors. Open this up. And then here there's some important settings too. If you see, this is basically your import functions. It's fine. I leave all of this the same even though I'm going to have to tweak it once it comes in because I use those numbers for reference later. If I click down here, there's a couple of expansions. Okay, this is the important one. Usually by default this says combine meshes. It's checked, and you don't want that checked. Basically look at all of these settings and make sure that they're the same. And we'll go ahead and hit import all. Okay. No smoothing groups are associated. What that basically means is that this was created in Rhino and not in a program like Blender, where smoothing is actually a function of grouping different types of objects to make them look more organic. So we've got here is all of these. And sometimes, yes, color coding does create problems because it imports the colors as well as the shapes of the objects. So you can see like this wall is red. All right, so let me undo that. Actually, I missed some. So you want to make sure you grab all your geometry. I missed this one here. Grab them all at once. And we can see some of them didn't import quite right. We can change all this. We're going to have to just do a little tweaking. Oh, these are geometry. Okay. So put that in there. And then you can see it's on its side. So I use a, under the details panel up at the top, I have kind of a number that I always use that I think works pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and transform this. And you'll write this down eventually. -700, tab 3, 1, 2, 3, 3000, 100, and 90. Well, that doesn't work. There we go, 0. All right, and then we want to make sure that all of our objects and everything are located inside of our room here. So let's go ahead and grab all of our objects, all titled based on their layers, which makes it really easy to find and deal with. So if I select all of these, I can actually just move. And then this number here is what's going to be crucial. You want to keep this written down somewhere as a reference, because if you make any changes in Rhino, we'll be able to just import back into its same space. Okay, so let's go ahead and start fixing this thing up. All right, so you can see this didn't import for some reason. So sometimes if a file is corrupt or something like that, you might have to open it in Photoshop again and then save it as a different file just to make sure it works. I'm going to go back to my original here. So I imported this image here. If I right click on it, I can go to create material out of it. So now I double click on this and click on this, and you see that the image is there, but it's only going to have one, it's going to be one tiled piece, so it's going to stretch across the whole thing. So in here, this is the materials editor. The materials editor is really cool. I kind of think of it as like a guitar pedal in an amplifier. So you have all of these different plugins to change the parameters of the visual sound, if you will. So you've got your base color, which in this case isn't a color, it's a texture. You'll see in other materials that we have that it will be a color there. Metallic, you can make it have more metallic. Specular, you can make it have more reflective qualities. Roughness, again, deals with reflection. So the roughness of the material, if you have it at a 0, will make it super shiny. Emissive color, does it glow? That kind of stuff. A normal map, which this actually is a bump map, but I'm using it in the wrong spot. You can make normal maps from any image using Photoshop. I can show you real quick how to do that. If I double click this, it'll bring me to this material. If I come over here, it'll show me its file path location. I can then come over here to that actual material, click on it, right click, go open with Adobe Photoshop. And this is how you make texture too. So Photoshop has a lot of really great 3D functionality. And then under filter here, you just go to 3D and generate normal map. And there you go. So it gives you a 3D kind of map of how the recesses in the object will look. In this case, it's backwards, so I'm going to invert it. There we go. That's how it should look. And then hit OK. And go File, save as, change that to norm. Close this down. Okay, and then cancel that, and we'll go ahead and just leave this, but come over here, and now if I import my norm, boom, open, I can apply that normal map. Close this window. Right here, if I pull this out and go to texture, sample, same thing as this, but this time it found my only normal map, so it knew that that's what I wanted. And if you look closely, you can kind of see how that bends around the form. And if it's not doing enough for you, you can use what's called a multiplier, which is awesome. So if I use the multiplier, plug my RGB into here, plug this into my normal. Right now it's set to nothing because I have nothing on my B side, but if I pull this out and use this thing called a constant, a constant is basically just a knob to turn it up and down. So at 0, you're at 0. At 1, you're at 100%. So I change it to 1. When it plugs in through the multiplier, and then we go ahead and apply it. So that gives you this. If you wanted to make it super shiny, I can go to my roughness and just do a constant. Constants you can plug in right off of any of these. So if I set that at 0, now you'll see it is super shiny because you have 0 roughness, so it's completely polished. Okay, apply. And then I'm going to want to actually multiply this texture itself, so it's not one single texture. So I'm going to pull off of this and use what's called a texture coordinate. And all of these funky names and stuff you'll just have to kind of memorize. So when I click on the texture coordinate here, I can now change this to 10 by 10 or whatever you want it to be, and you'll see that it multiplies it. But it looks funky, so you need to multiply this too. So you have to keep them. Well, I wonder if I can do both. Yeah, makes it easy. There we go. So save. And now I've created a material from scratch, given it parameters. And those are kind of the basic parameters for tiling, for multiplying, for dealing with normal maps. Something like this is a basic texture. You can even have it be more basic by getting rid of the normal map and all of this other stuff and just tiling an image. That's the easiest way. So I'm going to close that. And let's go ahead and apply it to the wall here. Oh, and you can see it's too small. All right, so then I'm going to come back here and just click on my texture coordinate and change it to 1. Maybe 1 was fine. And then look at it in my scene. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So that's that texture. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to change the color of the sky or the walls here first. So this here is diffuse red, right? So if I just go to this, click on it, well, I'll just look for it. There it is. Okay, so double click on it, and I'm just going to change this parameter, which is your color parameter here. If I double click on it, I can move it to white, and OK. All right, apply, save. Cool. And that should change that. And then I should just be able to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and apply them to the bases here. Okay. So let's play with the materials a little bit more. I'm going to make these paint colors glow. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this, and I'm going to pull emission out here, and I'm going to just do a constant. And I'm going to make it glow. If you make it glow too much, you can't see the color, so you got to find that sweet spot. That's too much. About 1.25. Okay. And then let's go ahead and okay. And the last thing I want to do is I want to make this a transparent, like almost like a glass orb. So let's go ahead and don't have anything clicked here. If you come over here, these are the different options here, and you see opaque. If I change that to translucent, there you go. We can now pull off of opacity and set a constant. And it's gone because it's 100% transparent. So let's change that. Okay. And you can tweak it as you want here. Specular doesn't work. When you've got it set to translucent, you can notice that these parameters are kind of less there. So let's now go over here. Let's do refraction, a constant, because I want to make it kind of shiny too, right? So let's make it 0.25. Okay, and then here, let's do another one. Oops. And we can even throw a normal map on it, right? So it'd be transparent but have texture. So let's go ahead and do texture sample. Okay. And we'll use that same normal map we've already got. And you can see texture on it. Awesome. So let's go ahead and apply that, and we'll close it. Okay. And you can see that's the material we made. And then what I'd probably do is just go ahead and go through each of these and change them all individually. Or you can duplicate this material and just change the color. That might actually be easier. So if we right click on it, you can go to duplicate, and there you go. If I click on it, now all I got to change is this parameter here, which is the color. I can change it to any color I want, and then apply, save. And that might be easier because you don't have to deal with all of those parameters. So then I can change that to material there. Cool. So that gives you glowing, transparency, all of that kind of stuff. Then back under content, when we imported at the beginning, we imported starter content, which gives you all kinds of stuff, none of which I use except for materials. So under materials here, you see you've got metallics, you've got all different types of stuff here, and I've also got glass. So we've got this beautiful skylight up here. If I just drop it there, now we've got some light in our room. All right. So you can see materials, there's a ton of stuff you can do with that. I can make things rotate, I can, there's so much, they're almost bottomless, and it's probably as confusing as you need it to be. But looking at these as well, you can kind of see how these materials are made. So if I go into my glass here, you can see it's using translucent, and they've got all of these parameters at 10, 0, 0.35. So it's creating all kinds of stuff. And then under refraction, of course, it's got a crazy little bit of lingo right here that we don't have to deal with. But you can see that transparent materials are still pretty complicated. And then I just use the glass, but you can, make the floor have kind of crazy glowing hexagon shapes. It can go up the wall too. And then you see this is another issue you have with tiling, right? These surfaces are different sizes, and since it's actually probably stretching all the way up, since it's stretching all the way outside because we didn't explode it to make one surface different than the rest, I actually need to create another material here. So if you duplicate this, and then you can go in here and do your texture coordinates and change all of them. So if I change that to 20, 20, I got to come up to this one too. 20, 20. We're looking for the texture coordinates. Time, that's not it. Looks good, apply. And then you go ahead and just apply that material that has the augmented scale. And you might even need to change the up and down tiling to make it stretch, right? But if you were to have joined this surface to the floor surface, it should all read pretty much as one piece, hopefully. Okay, so that's materials. Let's go ahead and go back to my content, my Rhino geometry here, and I'm going to apply just for fun, just throw these. We've already got everything set up to be able to walk through and everything like that. The next problem is collisions. So how does the viewer, when he comes into the space, interact with these objects? Do they walk up to them and hit them, or walk through them, right? So if I change my view here, by the way, I've also got a top view, which is great for laying stuff out. So if I go to top here, I can actually just click and move things. I can go to front view, left view, right view. We all use these all the time in CAD, so it's great that they have them here. And I'm looking for this. Go ahead and pull it down, and you can see I can choose where I'm starting. If I go back up to my top view, I can switch this to rotate from move. Right now it's set at move. If I change it to rotate here, I can rotate it around, and we're looking at my perspective. Okay. And then go back to move. Oops. So that looks like a good place to start. But my problem is going to be that when I look at it in my collision view, instead of lit, you can also use unlit. Unlit's good sometimes for conserving energy. Wireframe gets confusing, but is good in top views and front views. Reflections show kind of how the light bends on things. But player collision is what we're talking about here. Now by default, this thing is a block. And basically inside the block, you've got these cubes. And a lot of times you can't navigate the space yet because of the way the collisions are set up. So the walls we want to also change. So let's go over here, right click, edit, And then let's go ahead and do a collision, simple collision, then mesh or collision. Let's remove all the collisions first. Then let's go ahead and add through here a simplified collision. And then let's go ahead and go to the top here so we can see, scroll down, collision complexity, and change it to use complex collision as simple. Save it. And then when we look now, it's all working. So you might have to do those with each to get your collisions to look like mine, but you basically want the collisions to look like this. And so you can see even these you can edit, and then my process usually is remove collision and then add this kind of collision, the 10.x simplified, scroll down, collision complexity, use complex as simple, and that's what it does is it changes. So if I go back to project default here, you see that my collision is this box that goes around the whole thing, kind of funky, but then if I change it from project default to use complex as simple, it actually creates a collision that completely surrounds the object. Okay. So now it's a playable walkthrough, WASD keys, but you can also use the game controller, you can use all different forms of method of controlling based on the blueprint that's set up. But that's the basics. I think you can build quite a bit off of that. Just remember, if you're having problems seeing things in the form, go back to your Rhino file, and depending on what it is, sometimes I'll mirror the object. If it's, mirroring it that way because it flips it, and a lot of times if you have a texture on it and you rotate it, it will actually rotate the texture too. But if you mirror it, it won't rotate the texture. So the idea is you just make sure that it's rotated the right direction. And that's because of something called normal mapping. Normals can be modified and edited in Blender, so you can export these files, bring them into Blender, and edit the normal maps to change the direction that the software is going to read as the surface. And if that works, then great for you, but what I do simply is just flip the surface because the normal map is just pointed the wrong direction. So that's the basics on normal maps, and yes, you do have to edit them there. Alright, so next what I want to do is put some lights in here, although it doesn't really need much because you've got that big skylight there. But your space might. So if I go to lights here, different types of lights, I usually like to use spotlights. So if I place a spotlight, pull it up a little bit, and move it so that the hot spot is over my object. Sometimes that's easier to do from a top view. Yes, we were way off. So I'll put it right over the top. And then if we look at the parameters for the light that we have selected here, you can change the intensity of it. You can change how far out the radius is from the object so it doesn't have to shine all the way through the floor. Inner cone if you want like a hot spot. Outer cone, you can make it narrower. And then once you get the light kind of set up the way you want, if you're going to use multiples of them, I go back to the top view and I just go Control C or Command C if you have a Mac. Copy and paste. 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 Okay. Now with lights, one other thing you want to keep in mind is if you're not going to make them come on and off or change them, you can make them static, which is a lot better for computational purposes. So I would actually click on this and make each one of these static. I probably should have done that first. And if you put a lot of lights in one room and you don't have them set to static, if there are overlaps on where the lights are, they're going to give you a little X sign over the light. That just means change it from stationary to static. Okay. So let's go back to perspective here. So we've got some lights, we've got some materials, we've got collisions, we've got glass. Let's go ahead now and do our first build and change the lighting quality. I'm going to put it up to production because I don't think I'm going to do multiple builds on this. I've got this pretty much done. But leaving it at preview makes things quicker on the build side. So change it to production and I'm going to click build. And this is going to take a bit of time. So I'll pause it and come back once it's done. But you'll see this go through and then they'll start saying things down here. And this warning is just saying the lighting needs to be rebuilt and it's rebuilding. I'm used to dealing with larger files, so the lighting build is complete and any errors that come up will come up here. Most of the time I ignore them, but there are some that create little artifacts, and if you don't fix that, then you have problems. Okay. So now we can see that we've lost a bit of color on these on the material on the wall. And I don't know if that's a lighting artifact or a problem with the type of file I used. So could just be reflecting the darkness. So maybe what I'll do is go ahead and make it glow a little bit. This is, I think, maybe cheating, but we'll see. There we go. So it was just because it was reflecting the darkness, I think. All right, so next what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and package project. So if you're using a Mac, you can package it for Mac. If you're using Windows, you can package it for Windows. And you might have to make sure under Launch, you go to Device Manager. And if you have anything you need to add, oh, sorry, not Device Manager. Supported platforms, my mistake. Make sure that everything here that you want to use is checked. Okay. But I usually use my Mac to package it for Mac and my Windows to package for Windows. It just works better. You have to have some developer permits, and it costs money to do it from Unreal Engine for Mac if you don't have a Mac. So Windows 64-bit saves the assets, and then it gives you a folder, and I'm going to put it back under here, create a new folder, and call it Unreal Game Test. Down here, if everything goes right, it'll package the project and you can run it independently. Okay, it said packaging project complete down here. And now I can go to my folder and where it says game test, Windows no editor, Unreal T, this is the executable file. You can change that little icon in your project settings, but it's fine to leave it like that for now, just because it's enough stuff to learn at this point. So now when I double click on that, it opens it standalone. I can look around my room, I can walk. You know, some of these things are a little funky. I made the tops of these transparent, so it's a little weird. It's like lit transparent with this material on it, and it's showing the white below. There's some funkiness, but you definitely get the idea. Modeling in Rhino, setting up layers, exporting, making sure your file sizes are right, generating normal maps, editing materials, should all be kind of elucidated by this. So thank you guys very much. And oh, by the way, it's hard to get out of this sometimes because escape doesn't work unless you set it up to work. But if you hit the Windows button or Command W, if you have a Mac, Command W will close the window, and then I usually just come over here, right click, and close. And if you want to fix that, quick and easy, sorry, let's go to the blueprints, open level blueprint. You open the level blueprint, and all you got to do is right click and type escape, and that brings up the escape button, and it says, well, when it's pressed, what do you want to do? And then you go to quit game. Boom. And then compile. And now when you build it, escape should close the game.